Okay, let's unpack this with a concept challenge right out of the gate, tailored just for you.
Let's do it.
If you have worked the same high-pressure job for 35 years, the same company, same role, and you've achieved total financial freedom, what do you do next?
99% of society gives the same answer. You retire, you maximize leisure, maybe you buy a boat, you certainly stop taking on complex global responsibilities.
You focus on consumption, exactly.
Yeah.
But the answer provided in the extensive source material we've been diving into today is emphatically not retirement.
Not even close.
It's the continuation of work, but with a radical shift in purpose. It's building God's kingdom and transforming into a steward of eternal resources.
And that pivot from a retirement mindset, which is, fundamentally self-focused, to a global mission.
Yeah.
That's the central tension we're exploring.
Right. Our mission today is to analyze this strategic playbook. We're dissecting a Chinese language sermon that lays out a church's operational theme for 2026. Gospel globalization and expanding God's kingdom.
So we're really trying to extract the core strategy.
Yes, how does a small, focused faith community view its mandate to spread what it considers an eternal, unchanging truth in a dizzyingly fast modern world?
And that tension, the eternal truth versus the modern imperative for speed and accommodation, is perfectly encapsulated by a famous quote they cite from the theologian Karl Barth.
What's the quote?
It says, "Faith must be lived out and life must be faith-based."
I love the visual the speaker used for that. It's about holding, one hand holds the Bible, one hand holds the newspaper. You need the sacred foundation, yes, but you also have to understand the current reality you're communicating in.
That's the entry point. You must know your context, but the center of the message, that has to remain fixed.
So let's start there, because this is where they draw a very hard line. If the message is non-negotiable, what is the anchor text they focus on?
The materials repeatedly emphasize what they call the single most important verse in the entire Bible.
John 3.16.
John 3.16. That specific verse is the foundational certainty. God loved the world so much, he gave his only son.
So that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life.
That's it.
That immediately establishes the scope of the mission. It's universal. They assert no one is an outsider because fundamentally we are all sinners.
And salvation is only available through faith in Jesus Christ. But what's crucial here is the sermon's immediate warning about the method of communication.
Okay.
They are deeply concerned that in trying to adapt to modernity, the core message gets diluted into something. Well, something palatable or convenient.
So how do they suggest a modern community protects that core message when culture is pushing so hard for accommodation?
They argue the central focus must always be the crucified Jesus and the Christ resurrected from the dead.
Okay.
They warn against treating the gospel like a business that is merely satisfying what you like.
Like tailoring a product to a customer's whim?
Exactly. They say this is a fixed historical event and an eternal truth. It can't be customized into some self-help philosophy.
So the message itself is protected by its complexity and its focus on sacrifice and resurrection, not on comfort. That's a sharp defense against making it easy.
Precisely. And the fulfilling of the mission, what they call the Great Commission, is then broken down into two very specific actions. It's not vague.
And those are?
First, baptizing people in the name of the Trinity, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Second, and this is key for this stewardship model, teaching them to obey everything Jesus commanded.
So it shifts the whole focus from just passive agreement to active discipline.
Yes.
Okay, so if the message is fixed and the mandate is clear to teach obedience, then the question shifts to the capacity of the person delivering it.
Right.
And this is where we get into that identity transformation that's so central to this deep dive. We move from one status to a higher, more demanding one.
And to frame this transition, the sermon uses the transformation of Saul to Paul.
Saul, his traditional Jewish name, it anchors him in his past, his tradition.
His background as a persecutor of Christians.
And then Paul, the Hellenized, or Roman name, shows a strategic shift in identity.
He used it because he held Roman citizenship. It just made communication and travel so much easier throughout the Roman Empire.
So it signals a move away from only his heritage to strategically engaging the world.
Exactly. And that strategic engagement mirrors the three levels of identity that every believer is challenged to ascend to.
Starting with level 1, the child of God.
This is the baseline. It's achieved through baptism, and it's considered a great grace. The result is gratitude, reverence, a pursuit of personal holiness.
This is the identity that allows believers to call God Abba Father.
Yes, a wonderful, blessed state.
But the sermon presents a challenge. Is that the final destination? Is it enough to just be a well-blessed, good luck child waiting for heaven?
And this is a crucial distinction. The material warns that if you stop at this child level, focus purely on receiving enjoyment and personal blessing.
It's a problem.
Well, this mindset can become a wide road leading to error. It's just too passive. The spiritual journey, according to this church, demands movement beyond being a mere recipient.
Okay, so how do you climb out of that recipient mindset? You ascend to level 2.
The servant of Jesus Christ, this is the identity of the diligent worker.
So now we're talking about action.
Diligence, loyalty, and importantly, a professional attitude toward the work. They link this directly to the parable of the talents in Matthew 25.
The workers who doubled what they were given through industrious service.
And that's the one.
And Paul is the ultimate example of this servant. When you read his letters, the sheer commitment is just staggering.
It really is.
He lists his sufferings, beatings, imprisonments, shipwrecks, slanders, but he calls all of that physical hardship external matters.
Just things concerning his body. His true internal burden, the mark of the dedicated servant, was worrying about all the churches.
So his primary concern wasn't his own survival.
No, it was the spiritual health of other believers being harmed by cults and the influence of non-believers. This is a life utterly consumed by the work itself.
So the child receives grace. The servant proves their gratitude through relentless work, often at great personal cost. But the sermon says there's a step even beyond that.
Yes, that leads to the highest achievement, level 3, the steward or manager of God's kingdom.
Okay, this is where diligence meets strategic vision.
Mm-hmm.
How does being a steward differ from just being a diligent servant? A servant works hard. What does a steward do differently?
The steward must be discerning, continuously trained, strategic, and possess kingdom vision. They are managing the long-term resources.
So it's not just about doing the work.
No, it's about planning the work. They reference 1 Corinthians 4 about being stewards of God's mysteries and 1 Peter on being good stewards of God's varied gifts.
This is a huge distinction. The servant is tasked with doubling the talents they are given. The steward is responsible for designing the strategy for the entire enterprise. They manage the inventory, they allocate the capital, which in this context is time, talent, and energy.
Exactly. This height is not just about personal holiness or even being a loyal, hardworking servant. It requires actively planning and working toward the long-term global goal of the kingdom.
And if you have that financial freedom we talked about at the top,
The steward views that freedom as capital that must now be invested in the mission, not just in personal leisure.
which brings us directly to the core motivation for all this. Why accept this high-level management role? The source calls it the compulsion of grace.
Yeah, Paul lays this out in 1 Corinthians 9. He says he has nothing to boast about in preaching. It is a necessity. He says, I would have woe if he failed to share it.
Whoa, that's a strong word.
It is. He received this enormous gift of grace, despite being, in his own words, a chief sinner. And if he fails to transfer that gospel, he feels a disaster internally.
They use a fantastic analogy to make this abstract compulsion absolutely tangible.
Oh, this is great.
It involves static electricity in the winter.
Right. The scenario goes like this. Why were people being constantly shocked by static electricity touching doorknobs, taking off coats during the cold winter of 2025?
But then, mysteriously, it stopped in the winter of 2026.
Mm-hmm.
And the explanation given locally was something they called the mitochondrial trinity.
Which sounds incredibly scientific. What does that even mean?
Exactly. It sounds so technical, but the core idea they promoted was just simple wellness practices. Sunshine, grounding, and super slow running.
And the key was the grounding or earthing. The belief was that connecting your body to the earth removes that negative charge, the bad electricity that causes the shocks.
So that's the setup. And the application, the aha moment, is immediate.
Yeah.
If you found a simple free solution like walking barefoot outside that stopped you and your kids from getting shocked daily, would you not instantly share it with everyone?
Absolutely you would. You tell your family, your neighbors, it becomes unconscionable not to.
And the sermon argues that knowing the gospel is the ultimate solution to an infinitely worse eternal shock.
That knowledge, that grace, creates an undeniable ethical burden to share it.
So this compulsion just overrides any pursuit of personal reward. It reinforces the idea that Paul saw the work as a non-negotiable responsibility.
A responsibility entrusted to him because of who he once was.
And if you fail to move from that child identity to servant or steward, the source says you just don't understand what Jesus means by doing God's will.
Because the will of God isn't passive acceptance, it's the active, strategic management of the mission.
Okay, so if the motivation is a compulsion rooted in grace, the strategy has to align with that purity. How do they execute this global mission without turning it into the business they so strongly warned against?
This is where we see the ultimate application of the steward's mindset. They exercise the right to waive rights.
What does that mean?
Paul had the right to be paid for his ministry, but he gave it up so his financial needs wouldn't hinder the spread of the gospel.
That voluntary poverty is a powerful statement, especially when you contrast it with the anecdote the sermon shared.
Oh, yes. The story of a wealthy businessman in Singapore whose enterprise failed. Desperate, he paid a master $8,000 USD for a talisman.
Which was completely useless.
Useless. The point they're making is stark. Spiritual services often come with an enormous price tag and deliver nothing. The gospel, by contrast, must not be a source of profit or hidden mysticism.
And that commitment to a completely free message is the foundation of their extraordinary digital outreach model, which they call the Gospel Big Box.
And they have 4 incredibly strict non-negotiable rules for their YouTube and podcast operations.
These rules are designed to eliminate all potential barriers and commercial influence. They're radical.
I mean, they cut off every typical revenue stream.
Let's list them. Rule 1, no membership fees.
Rule 2, no ads or sponsorships whatsoever.
Rule 3, no donations accepted. They actively refuse money.
And Rule 4, they stopped allowing comments or messages.
Wow. So they eliminated the need for constant reactive maintenance.
The strategy is purity and sustainability. By removing all financial dependency and all external demands for feedback, they create a completely free, uninterrupted listing environment.
But let's pause here because the logistics of this are staggering. The commitment required. We're talking about a small church of only about 50 people.
50 people. Yet in just 3.5 years, they have uploaded over 6,000 original programs and episodes.
6,000. That's an enormous labor output. The sermon itself calculated that this amount of content would provide 1 episode per day for 20 years of listening.
20 years.
How do 50 people refusing all money accomplish that?
It's the strategic deployment of the steward identity. The entire operation is currently run at 0 cost.
0 cost? How?
It relies on simple, off-the-shelf equipment and, crucially, the dedicated time and professional skills of volunteers. These are people who are now committing their strategic capital, their time, to this mission.
So they aren't relying on big fundraising campaigns or fancy studios. They're relying on the diligence of Level 2 servants and the strategic planning of Level 3 stewards.
That zero-cost, high-output model is the purest definition of leveraging limited resources for maximum kingdom vision.
And this commitment leads directly to their philosophy on metrics.
Which I found amazing. They state clearly, many listeners is our expectation. Few listeners is our glorious persistence.
That is a phenomenal statement. It's saying the mission is purely for God to gain more people, not for boosting institutional reputation or profit.
The 6,000 program library is a permanent global resource, a pure example of stewardship that divorces success from immediate, quantifiable returns.
So we started this deep dive with that choice, retirement or global mission. We followed the path from the passive identity of the child of God,
Grateful for grace,
through the diligent, hardworking servant, to the strategic steward of God's kingdom.
That final identity, it demands proactive, long-term vision, using every resource, time, talent, technology for a global mission.
It reminds us that the impact isn't always physical or immediate.
Reintroducing the metaphor of light is the perfect final reflection. The sermon compares this mission to light. You can't physically hold light, but it's powerfully illuminating.
It influences things across great distances.
Exactly. The work done, those 6,000 programs, isn't about establishing new physical locations. It's about providing light in dark places globally. In the USA, Japan, Europe, wherever.
That's the ultimate goal of the steward, to make the resource available everywhere, regardless of credit or cost.
Right.
And the source ultimately challenges you, the listener, with this question. When you stand before God, will your identity be limited to saying, I believe in Jesus?
Or will you be able to say, I learned to be a steward, and I strategically manage my resources to be used for his kingdom?
This is the final provocative thought we leave you with, straight from the strategic blueprint we analyzed.
What concrete action are you taking now that demonstrates the kingdom vision of a true steward? Viewing your time, skills, and capital as a critical resource to be managed for a long-term global purpose, and not merely enjoyed for personal consumption.